Well,
So, Scotty boy, what you been up to?
reading about you, among other things. But I think, you know, one of the things after you see this movie that struck me anyway is that there's a sense of forward motion that you've spent your whole life always sort of looking for the next thing, the next passion to ignite you as an artist, as an activist. And in a way, it sort of begs the question of actually what brought around this film and this and your autobiography, which also came out last year, My Song, which I encourage people to read if they haven't, in which you look back on your life, because you do seem such a forward-looking person.
What's your next question? No. I don't know that being a forward-looking person is necessarily a gift. It served me well because I keep looking forward to the next experience, the next knock at the door. When the whole idea of this film coming into fruition revealed itself, just a set of coincidences. Somebody was shooting a film on a guy that I have a lot of love for by the name of Pete Seeger, and I like what they were doing with his life, and I kind of envied the opportunity one day to maybe catch lightning in a bottle and get the same people to consider making a film of my journey. And I happen to have said that in a place where I knew they would overhear me. And the guy's name is Bill Eigen. He comes from this community. He lives here. And he was making this film and was one of the investors and producers. And started to talk about the idea of making the film that you've all just seen. And it wasn't so much that he had said yes to the idea, but that he brought such a generosity to the table. He said several things to me that never discussed the cost of the film. It just said, how long do you think it'll take? And what do you need to do it? And I right away got into rights and into becoming facilitated. And he said, well, we can guarantee that you'll have the opportunity to shoot all you want to shoot. And that was the worst thing he could have said, because I just got hold of some cameras and started them rolling. And after the first year, they were still rolling. And after the second year, they were still rolling. And after the third year, they were still rolling. And after the fourth year, they were still rolling. And what was very strange to me was that nobody ever asked about visiting any of the locations I was shooting at. Nor did anybody call to ask me how was their money doing. And I somehow did not want to disturb this fantasy I was living out. But then there came a time when we had so much footage, so many people had been interviewed, so many stories were being told. And I had no idea, while I was shooting all this stuff, exactly where all this stuff would wind up. What would be the end result? And thanks to Bill Eigen and to Michael Cole, if it had not been for their generosity and the resources that they brought and the way in which they permitted me to shoot, I don't think anything that's on that screen would have happened, number one. Number two is that when I started to tell the story, many interventions had appeared. One was that Marlon Brando, one of my closest friends, had just passed away. And I was upset with the fact that he had left such a space where his generosity and his life and his humanity had found expression. And that he had left with his story, and nobody knew really quite what it was that he had done. They knew about his great artistry, they knew about his absolutely genius as an actor, and the innovations that he brought that changed the system of the approach to acting eternally. And he himself, how much he was engaged in the struggles of people who were brutalized for a host of social reasons that are all touched upon in the film. And when he passed, I said, you know, he took his story with him, but let me hurry up and find out who remains, who will remember that story, who will be able to help me recall the history that was to be touched upon. And as I began to talk to people, it no longer became just the story of Marlon and what he had done, but also the story of a huge journey and a set of coincidences that every time I got to a person, they started to talk, we were taken to another place and space. So the journey itself was kind of defying. It was elusive. I didn't know how to get my arms around it. We just had all this footage and all these people saying these many things. One of the things I think the most preoccupied me was how do you touch that much life, and how do you approach the idea of truth-telling and speaking truth to power in a way that just doesn't become your own mischief. So when I said, for instance, to a friend of mine that I was going to be making this film, he said to me, well, I'd like you to prepare yourself for your really first important relationship to fiction. And I reflected on that, and he was absolutely right. No matter how I would tell this story, it would still be a version of an experience that I had. And that by getting other people who had complemented the same experience, who had the same experience, to get them to tell it from their perspective, took the onus of the constant temptation to reinterpret history or to shift a phrase or a thought to your side of the agenda. And with the numbers of people who stepped to the table to tell the story, the next thing was, how do you give this volume of work so much, how do you give it space and reason for being? And Michael Cole, who understood my dilemma and understood the problem we faced, recommended a woman by the name of Susanne Rostock to become my editor. And although I had known of her, I didn't know her personally. And when we sat and talked after the first few meetings, it became quite evident that what we needed to do was to let her get into the room, look at the footage, and begin to toy with where she saw openings and beginnings and conclusions. And we began to have this debate. And out of this, her very first edit, we pretty much retained what you see, that opening of social turbulence. You know, when you deal with a personality that has been parallel to the kind of history that I've experienced and dabbled in so much of it, you have to deal with how people perceive you to begin with. What's the first thing I'm going to say being seen on the screen by the audience? And while I was struggling with that, the first words that came out of my mouth on the screen is, there's a lot of people around here who are really pissed off. And there went the Banana Boat song, there they have been charged, everything, just the first words out of my mouth was this rage. And it was the way in which Susanne handled that moment, because it was part of a group of people who had occasion to speak at an event for the Congressional Black Caucus. And the other two speakers were actually, there were four of us altogether. One was a man by the name of Ogletree, who was the dean of the Harvard Law School, who was the professor for both Michelle Obama and Barack. And he was hosting the event for the Black Caucus. And the other two people to speak were Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And then I was to speak. And this audience that sat out there, I listened to them very carefully, how they applauded the things that were being said by the two speakers that spoke before me. And this black audience and the enthusiasm they showed for certain moments and little political tidbits here and there. And I saw the whole thing to be a little fraudulent. I saw it to be a little self-serving. I didn't get the sense that we were there to shake the tree. And I just looked around on what they said. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. There are a lot of the people in the world who are really pissed off. And that's how I started my end of it. And I walked into this moment with a little bit of disdain for the moment, a little bit of rage. And that's how Susanne decided to take the lead. And from that moment on, it was just a matter of going back into moments of my life and telling the story in some chronological order. But there are over 700 hours of film left that has not been touched, that we're now looking at going back into. We're not quite sure what we'll do with it. We'll have to let it tell us what stories it has to tell. But it was, I'd never had an experience like that before. Nothing about it was controlled in the sense that I knew where I was going. I knew exactly and precisely what I wanted to say. I didn't know what I'd get. I didn't know what other people would say. I didn't know what they could be seduced into revealing, how courageous they'd be about their own exposure of self. I don't know what they felt would be awaiting them with the audience who would have known a lot of these people to be something other than what they might be required to say. So it was a dance all the way. Every edited moment was a new revelation. And the film never lingers too long in any one place. It just bumps you right to the next event. And to that extent, I thought that Susanne was absolutely a miracle worker. So you just went to turn the page, just went to shut down the moment, and just went to bring the next moment in. We had to place humor, if there was in fact to be a need for a humorous relief to a certain heavy-handedness we occasionally got into. And then it was being able to seduce people into saying things, and to saying things about themselves that they may not ordinarily would say. I had every reason to believe that most of the stuff that was told in this film would be rejected by the institutions that would now be put upon to give me a distribution platform. I had no idea about Sundance. I learned soon enough that there was a path to be followed. There was some history in the way in which these things are done, but I had no synergy with that. I had no relationship. Although I knew a lot of the people, I didn't know what to do. I don't know how you go to Sundance and present a documentary that you've just done about a life that has touched so many moments, and to tell it in a way that would let the industry feel challenged by what I said about it. There is a distance between myself and the industry of show business. I have always been in a clash with it. I've often looked upon the canvas that one can paint from the palettes that we're given as artists to say things about the world in which we reside and we have experiences. And do we understand, as I have been told by people whom I so deeply revered, like Robeson, that artists are in fact the gatekeepers of truth. And if you accept that definition or see light in it, then what are you telling? What are you doing with your moment at the palette? What do you want to say? And what frustrated me was that at the time that I met Marlon, was it just at the ending of the Second World War? We'd both all been just coming back from the armed forces. And I had no idea that the theater would be my experience. It was a coincidence. I was a janitor's assistant, which was the extent of my social skills. And but I was excellent at it and got all sorts of gratuities, the most important being 2 tickets to a theater performance. And I didn't even know it. I knew what a vaudeville house was like, because I grew up in them, the Apollo Theater in Harlem in New York, and watched all the big bands of the day and the great musicians do their thing. But I'd not seen theater in the sense of house of drama, 3 acts, playwrights. This was my first, and I walked into the theater wondering what to expect. And I was struck with the reverence in the room, because it's all black people, 40 of them, in the basement of the library in Harlem. And I'd never been in a place where there was such quiet and 40 black people in the same space. I just said I knew something reverential was going on, that I was in some place that had a touch of, it was sacred. So I decided to make sure I didn't violate the sacredness of the moment, didn't act out of line. But then the curtains opened and on came the players. And the words they spoke and the language was put into the mouths of the characters they played. And the passion with which they said what they said and how they moved that audience from emotion to emotion was an epiphany. It was just, something was awakened in me that I was absolutely not prepared for, had no reference for, except that I then and there understood that it was a place that I'd want to be forever, that I wanted to find a way in which to become associated with this community, to do anything. I didn't see acting, but I did see that I could maybe pick up some papers and clean the garbage or do things in the service of this community that had a lot of plays yet to be done. And I just hung around long enough until I was accepted into the group. And then eventually I was given a part to play. And it was by an Irish playwright by the name of Sean O'Casey, who was a great rebel and a man who dealt with oppression and the colonizing of the Irish by the British. And many of us in the play as blacks had a great affinity for the subject matter, because we were people who had been colonized, who had been brutalized. And every word that O'Casey wrote found great favor in our mouths. And we relished the way in which we had to say what was asked of the characters. And it was at this play that Paul Robeson walked in on the 2nd or 3rd night of the play. And we knew that he was there and was quite taken and overwhelmed by the fact that he was there. And at the end of the play, he just stayed and started to talk to us. And he was the one that told us about the privilege of being a player in the world of the arts, and what great possibilities resided here, and what we should be doing with this opportunity, and that our commitment to truth should be the first thing in our calling. And how do you tell truth? How do you take story and turn it into cause? And when I looked for where to go to find greater resonance in this learning process, the New School of Social Research had brought to America during the height of the war a Nazi refugee, a young man who had escaped from Germany, being chased by the fascists. And he came from the most important theater in Europe at the time, which was the Max Reinhardt Theater in Germany, the Dada movement and things that had to do with epic form of theater. And all of this stuff was new to me, and it's very strange, but I got into it because this man, Erwin Piscata, who came to America seeking refuge from the fascists, started this school at the New School of Social Research to teach an approach to theater that definitely set us up as the guardians of truth, as the keepers of truth, and the storytellers. And when you looked at who his associates were, Bertolt Brecht, and the whole Brechtian period of theater, and the epic power that was in our daily curriculum, it was amazing. We had to learn every aspect of theater. There was no such thing as just being a playwright or just being a director. You could have a major in any one of these choices, but you were required to participate and have in your curriculum all the other facets of theater. So I had to study lighting. I had to study costume design. I had to study dance. I had to get into all of these things as an adjunct to my interests, to my own craft. And all the others went on to become playwrights and directors. The class I was in was in itself its own strange consortium of players.
Walter Matthau.
Well, when I walked in the first day, I didn't know who we were to become. Yeah. But, I'm sitting in the classroom and there's Marlon Brando. And across the aisle from him was Walter Matthau. And across from him was Rod Steiger and B. Arthur. And that Tony Curtis, better known as Tony Schwartz, Bernie Schwartz.
Bernie Schwartz.
And here I was with all these young Turks. Most of them were ex-GIs who had come to this place to learn about the craft of theater. And what Piscata put before us was not to be resisted. It consumed us. And we got into social theater. Every mission was social. Every play was about another human dynamic. It revealed a lot of levels of the human experience. All the plays we were required to absorb. I was far from being an effective or a good reader, but I had to learn Shakespeare and I had to know all of Shakespeare. And then went on to the other classics and then look at all the American playwrights, John Steinbeck, and all of the early literary forces that impacted on theater. Clifford Odets, and certainly not too long after that came Arthur Miller and others who were part of the study period, who came and did their plays and had us as audition players to read the plays at given play reading classes. So the churning was constant. And we did not have layers of understanding to be an actor or to be a performer. There was not some technique that you had to be a TV actor as opposed to a film actor, as opposed to an actor for the theater, as opposed to a monologist. There were these creations didn't have had space. There were no such specialties. You're an actor, and you stepped into this place and you understood that your mission was to touch the most profound humanity we could unearth in our social experiences. So we told always the story of the underclass, of those in struggle. Nobody handled themes like that better than Shakespeare, and the poetry with which he revealed the text of the. It was just a place in which we resided forever, willingly, and had no real indication as to what we would do once we left that environment. It's just deeply consuming. And then came reality. We ran out of money. You couldn't stay in school forever. And when I went out to find work, I discovered that there was no work forthcoming. I did a play called Of Mice and Men, written by Steinbeck. And the character that was written for the play was not in Steinbeck's original. It's a character created by the director because he saw a way in which he wanted to move the scenery and the set and the moods of the players, and with each rhythm of a scene ending and a new one beginning, and the extensions of it. How do you deal with silence so that it's excruciatingly dramatic? And all these things were going on. And in this character, whom he called the balladeer, he wanted music in the play, but he wanted the music to be of the period. Yes. And it was the music of Woody Guthrie and the music of Leadbelly. And this character had to sing these songs at the end of the desired moment, a light cue, a scene shift, a dramatic moment, or when all the men were silent in the bunkhouse. This ethereal figure would emerge from the darkness and he would sing a song. And that was the part I was cast to do. And I approached it as an actor. Mm-hmm. And this character, it is required that he sings. And these are the songs selected from the repertoire of Guthrie and Leadbelly and other people in that Dust Bowl era from which Steinbeck drew the characters in the play. And that's when I first ever sang before an audience. In that theater were some jazz musicians who were friends of mine from the Royal Roost just across the street from where our school was. And I dropped down in the Roost every night to hear them bebop.
I believe one of
play.
them was the great Lester Young, if I'm not mistaken.
Lester Young was it. When I sat night after night listening to him, one night on a slow night, there was a table empty that he was sitting at, sipping his brew, and he said, waved to me to come on over because he'd seen me there endless nights, and he says, "You here every night? How are your feelings?" And I said, "How are my feelings? My feelings are okay." He said, "Yeah." So what do you do? And I said, "So I'm a student." He said, "Well, what do you study?" So I study theater. "Oh yeah? What do you study in theater?" "Acting." "You study acting?" "Yeah." "How you do that?" And I never answered the question. The way in which he solicited a response to how you do that, I found out that I could not describe. But in developing this relationship from that moment on that stage when he happened to have come to the theater to see what these young artists down the street were doing from him, when I bemoaned the fact that I couldn't find work, he was the one that suggested that I maybe put together a little repertoire and ask the guy who was the maitre d', or the guy who was the promoter for the club, if I could get a gig. And the guy whom I had to speak to had seen the play. And when I asked him about it, he said, yeah, okay, what's your repertoire like? I said, I don't have a repertoire. And he said, well, what kind of songs do you sing? I said, I don't know. I said, I know what kind of songs I like, but I don't have a repertoire. He said, and you want to sing here? Well, the name of the place was the Royal Roost. And it was in that time and in that space on Broadway, the most important jazz club in the world. There it was with Charlie Parker and Lester Young and Tommy Potter, the bass player, and Al Green, and he was a trombone player. Just on Stan Getz. Everybody that was in the modern jazz world was to be found in this temple of jazz. And they were all playing bebop and finding notes, going places we'd never heard of before. And it was in this environment they were inviting me to come be a singer. And being smart enough to know that opportunity was knocking at the door, but not bright enough to understand clearly how to grab it, I began to fumfer, began to look for a way into this place. And I said, well, I don't have any songs, really. And he said, well, Monty K was the name of the guy. He said, we can fix that. We get your piano player and get you some songs and see how you work out. So thanks to Lester, I went with this kid named Al Haig, which was a supreme player of the day, along with Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk and others. And he was my accompanist and helping me find 5 songs that made up my repertoire. And the songs I chose to pick were to play or sing with Pennies from Heaven. I thought it was very poetic that I was in this moment of great economic desperation. And I was invited to go find some songs and sing. And something I did not know how to do. But nobody else seemed to mind, so I wasn't going to give up the opportunity. So I put the repertoire together, started with Pennies from Heaven. And I think what really launched me, because the way I'd learned it with Al was Al did, we had it, the routine, bop, bop, be-doo, boop, bop, ba-da, ba-ba-da-ba-doo-doo-da. Ah, every time it rains, it rains. So I understood that, and we rehearsed it often enough for me to know that pop, dee-doo, bop, doop, doo-doo, doo-be-doo-be-doo-doo-doo was the way to go. So when they announced me to get on the stage for this night, that I was to have my grand opening, I was the intermission singer. While everybody was coming in to be seated for the main event, my job was to entertain them while they were being served their drinks. And when I was announced to go up, I went up, and Al Haig took his place at the piano, and he sat and kind of made the adjustment. And just as I was to give him the nod, he just ran off a couple of notes on the piano and a kind of arpeggiated run. And then up came Tommy Potter, a bass player, and he picked up his bass. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on. And then up came Max Roach, and he sat in on the drums. Now I knew these guys, and I'd had chit-chat with them as a student and coming night after night at the end of my theater project just to hear what was going on in the world. That was, to me, paradise. And night after night after night, we got to know a little bit about each other, but not the deeper promise. So when Max got up, after Tommy got to it, then came the coup de grace. Bird, Charlie Parker got up and came and hooked his horn, his alto, to his... That you, Charlie? But sat at there, and then I think it was Bird that said, "Where are we?" And Al said, "Penny from Heaven, pennies from Heaven, E flat." I counted, bop, one, da, da, and I'm waiting for bop, be-doo, bop, bop, do-be-doo, do-do, ba. No sooner had Al said a one, a two, when after the two beat, Charlie Parker went, and I was waiting for something to come and relieve me from this moment. But he did his run, and I couldn't find one. I couldn't find anything. I was just lost. And then Al laughed and then pounded out the top, and I was into my evening. I've often been asked, do I consider myself an actor or do I consider myself a singer? And I said that I first and foremost consider myself an actor. And where it appears as if humility has really abandoned me completely, I would say to whoever asked the question, not only was I an actor, but I was one of the world's finest. And when they looked at that humble response, they said, on what basis do you say that you're one of the world's greatest? I said, because look how long I've convinced the rest of the world I'm a singer.
But
go ahead.
well, I would say, but on a related note, if you're going out there every night singing, whether it's Pennies from Heaven or the Banana Boat song, and basically wanting the audience to feel like you're singing that song for the first time, that takes a lot of acting, doesn't it?
A lot. Especially when you realize very early on that you had no real inner affinity for the genre in which you were performing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I knew Ella Fitzgerald. I listened to Nat King Cole. I listened to Babs Gonzalez. I listened to Billy Eckstine. I listened to a lot of people who stroked it. Yeah. They were impeccable. They went to the right note the first time, every time. And I'm sitting there hunting for it. Mm-hmm. And it just was not where I belonged. I could not find my resonance. I could not find my footprint. And I had to leave it because although I was getting favorable response from those who saw me, I did not feel that I had the ability to endure a career. And I left and went off back into other attempts at life. And walked into a nightclub down in Greenwich Village and saw on the marquee a guy playing there by the name of Woody Guthrie. And I remembered him from the songs that I sang when I did Of Mice and Men. And although I knew who he was by this time, I'd never really seen him in person till I went down the Vanguard and I saw him. And that was the second time. I just got completely blown away. And the week right after him came Leadbelly. Mm. And I saw what Leadbelly did with the 12 string. And I saw how he phrased and how he dug into songs and made them come alive in ways that I had no idea how one would do that, except that's where I wanted to reside. So I began to look deep into the folk origins of the best in American music and found my synergy in that place, going down the Library of Congress and getting all the Lomax stuff and hanging out with Pete Seeger and with others to hear what they were saying and how they were saying it. and to find out where in this place would I fit. I had no credentials. I didn't come from the black church. I didn't come from a gospel experience. I didn't come from the Baptist tradition. As a matter of fact, I was born a Catholic, and a spiteful one. This was also strange. And yet, I had to find my voice, find my place, found how to take the passion and mold it into something that would please the listener. And I began to put this very odd repertoire together. And I sang the best I could. And the audiences who heard it began to reappear. And I began to build this base as a folk singer, never quite knowing what to call myself, except that from where I drew my interests in music that impacted on me was quite eclectic. Just wherever I went and heard it. Mm-hmm. And I began to sing because of my influence from Robeson, who not only spoke, but wrote and read fluently 22 languages. And I saw how he handled his repertoire in multi-language application. And I'd learn a lot of songs that I liked very much in the Spanish origin, or French, or even in some instances Greek. And then went after these songs. I loved a lot of the chants that I learned in Hebrew. And I found a way in which these places filled me with appetite for challenge, and to go and challenge places that I had to sing in. And the way in which these songs began to reveal themselves made for a very odd evening in the theater. That's why I say to anybody, if you've only heard me from the records that I've done, then you really do not understand what people criticized when they saw the event in the theater. Because the theater is where I really nested, is where what I was revealed itself. Mm-hmm. The records were just a memory of what may have taken place any given night. But it was the theater itself. And in this context, I began to build an audience that was global. When I began to look for repertoire, the place in which I felt most comfortable was going to where I had some history in the Caribbean. I was born in Harlem, went back when I was a year and a half. My mother took us there, brought us back when I was 12 at the outbreak of the war with England and Germany, because he knew that the Germans would overrun England in no time, and nobody quite understood what would happen to the colonies of England. And she wanted us back to America, where she felt we would be safe. And her vision was correct. But when I got back to America and got caught up in the passions of the war, was when I began to get my first indoctrination into political theme and into political dynamics. And when we went into the American Negro Theater and found more of this, we could find that language and space and the plight of the Jew and the plight of the Irish, and things began to perk. And I began to look at all these different levels of human endeavor, human encounter, human conflict, human attraction, and found the universe a remarkable place in which to play. And I began to look at what the power of these songs could do. So although I knew that the song Hava Nagila would have no particular meaning for a black audience, ever really, did not change the fact that I could sing songs that were rooted in black music that meant an awful lot to black audiences. The songs that I'd learned from Leadbelly and the Chain Gang material that I did that won so many awards and won Emmys and all the trophies and stuff. And the trophies were never really about what the object was. The trophies just always gave me a sense of validation, because it was only from this validation that I understood I was on a path that had a correctness to it, because I didn't sing like anybody else. Even until today, most people don't know what to call me. They call me a calypso singer, which is not true, but I did songs from the Caribbean. The Calypsonians are a whole other tribe, a whole other way in which they do their thing. I happen to just sing songs that came from the West Indies. They came from Cuba, they came from Haiti, they came from Jamaica. I sang wherever I found them in the language that was indigenous to the people. And by the time I got to singing the songs of the Jew, I not only had found political allegiances towards the struggles of what was going on with so many of the Jewish people whom I had come to meet, but when I went to Germany to perform for the first time, and I sang the song of the Jew to an audience made up of 100% Germans who jumped in and started to sing with me the chorus of the song in Hava Nagila, and he began to sing very lustily like it was a beer hall song, and with this German passion. And I was struck by the fact that I didn't do it, I wasn't pandering, I did it because it was part of my repertoire. I sang it everywhere. But here in Berlin, just a few short years after the Second World War, a nation that had tried to completely destroy another race of people. Here I was now as an African American of immigrant parents standing on a stage in Germany singing the song of the Jew, being responded to with the delight of a German audience which just a few short years earlier had tried to take these people off the face of the earth. And as an artist, I had another epiphany. What a remarkable thing to do. What a remarkable thing to be standing here with all these varying shades of life and birth and the things that happen, and to shape them into an evening where people heard all the songs of other people, heard the humor in it and the joy in it, and sang along it. And then when Robeson saw me sing, he said, get them to sing your song and they'll want to know who you are. And then you'll have the opportunity to lead people to where you might have a vision of what our humanity should be like. And although that metaphor hit me with the power in which it was given, I didn't quite understand it until one day I woke up and the whole world was singing, Deo, Deo, daylight come and go, day. And literally everybody was singing it. It just took off. And I realized the power of it when I went to Japan. And there was nothing, you haven't seen anything till you see 50,000 Japanese singing Deo. It racked me, man. It was like, wow. But here were all these things happening. Here were these different songs in these different places, giving people a moment of joy and a moment of passion and fulfillment. While on the American front, my politics was in a very hefty place of resistance to House Un-American Activities Committee. A lot of the things that I did were deeply rooted in the left or among people who were the liberals of their day. Not everybody who was a communist was a Stalinist. Not everybody who saw virtue in some of the communist dogma or some of the philosophy of that particular ideology were people who wished death and evil and villainy. It was the core of a certain kind of socialist thinking which wrapped itself each in the other. And we were driven by some of the great people of our time were considered to be communists and were brutalized for that fact. I mean, whether you like him or not, Albert Einstein was considered a communist and was defied by our government and registered as such. And so was Sigmund Freud, another great scientist who had probed the human mind and found new horizons on which to do scientific experiment on what is a human being. And then you had people who were the ones who had given cause to great, Beethoven and Brahms and everybody, all Germans. I mean, how do you make this thing work? And here were all these things. And I enjoyed many of the communists that I met. Robeson was anointed as one of them. And his dignity, his integrity, his humanity had a huge resonance with the world in which he found himself. And he was loved by so many and revered. And I watched a universe turn against him. I watched many of his own deny him. And much about what happened to him was, for me, quite biblical. In the way he was betrayed at the Last Supper. You can see all of these images in terms of what that great struggle was about. And the extent to which Dr. King, who came into the fold very early on, he was two years younger than I was when we met. He was 24, I was 26. He became very notable by the time he was 26 and I was 28. And he had taken on a lot of these ideas, a lot of these socialist ideas, the Poor People's Campaign. It was a huge socialist concept, movement, and we were all in it, yet at the same time forced to fight for our lives because of what the FBI did and what it said about us. And between, on the one hand, standing in places like London and Paris and Rome and being celebrated by the audiences in the world, coming back to America and finding some places where it wasn't so easy because somehow you had been defined as an anti-patriot.
Yeah.
That somehow what you were doing was not to the best interest of the country. When all that we did, I found, was to the best interests of the country, and still see it that way. But whatever it was that was at my disposal, what was the greatest underpinning was the knowledge that I was part of a group that had a purpose, and we were the gatekeepers of truth. And when that was spelt out in a finite way, we would challenge that concept even against religion. And those who would hold forth in the debate would point out that all that we know of religion in the Old Testament and the New, including the Quran and all else that is said, really came from those who were the gatekeepers of truth. The temples in which you worship were built by architects who knew how to put such temples together with such magnificence that they humbled you when you walked into them. That the stained glass windows, such use of color to tell biblical mythical tales, written by great writers who wrote the Old and the New Testament, who could make you believe that waters could be parted and that somebody walked on the water and somebody said, pick up thy bed and walk, and could take the biblical thought and ideas to such incredible places that even Michelangelo, and the gift of life from Michelangelo to God, and that thing that he did in the chapel. Everywhere you looked at, the idea that we were the gatekeepers of truth spelt itself out. In the earliest of caveman drawings, to the moment that you read something by John Steinbeck or by Hemingway or by, I remember the first time I picked up Langston Hughes's poetry and others who wrote from the black theme. I just felt as if somehow the gift of life had revealed itself and that I had this place in which to play. And that with all the anointings, it was amazing to me how often the things that happened to me happened as a result of my being willing to answer a knock at the door. Dr. King sought me out, and when he called and asked to see me, I was not only taken by the fact that he did it, but very eager to meet him. And he came to New York. He was giving a speech at the Abyssinia Baptist Church, and he was speaking to the ecumenical community with a bit of wrath in his voice for the fact that he felt the church had betrayed the flock, that ministers and the pulpit was not doing what it was ordained to do. It did not lead people to a righteous place. As a matter of fact, it manipulated the gift of the scriptures and turned people against each other. And when I first met Dr. King at this event to hear him speak, which blew me away, we met in the basement. And for what he said would be a short few minutes, at the end of almost 4 hours, we had this exchange. And then at a moment I said to him, well, Dr. King, I must tell you that although I'm quite prepared to service the needs for the cause you are putting before me, I must tell you that I would do you a great disservice if I were to lead you to believe that I have faith in it. Because I have no faith in religion. I find it an instrument of great manipulation. I find it the destroyer of truth. I find that those who maintain they possess a special anointing from the Creator are misleading the flock with such an interpretation. And until they looked more like Jesus, I refuse to treat them like Jesus. And therefore, wherever we may go, I think you should know that I don't know that you'll find me an easy part of your journey, and especially with the baggage that I bring politically. And he said, do you believe in a creator? I said, well, I know I'm not an agnostic. I refuse to be an atheist. I think I reside somewhere in being an agnostic because I feel that I want there to be God. I want there to be a spiritual force. I want there to be a moral underpinning to good and the way in which we envision something in us that's far nobler than anything we know. So in that context, I believe in the God force. I believe in the Creator. I believe in what Native Americans pay homage to each time they speak at an offering at the beginning of each time they sit in powwow and in council. And I listen to what the Buddhists say, and I listen to the reverence with which they treat creation. And I find in creation the miracle that makes up who and what I am. And I want to know more about that. And I would like to be able to endure forever to see where the truth will come from. We will never find it, because I don't believe there is such a thing as time as we perceive it. We're too puny to have a greater vision than the ones we have, because I think time always was, and time will always be. And nothing begins and nothing ends. It always endures. It is. And it always will be. And each day is to awaken to a miracle of that evidence being everywhere you go. No creature is beneath my capacity to embrace it and to care for it and to expect it to perhaps do the same for me. And when I brought that to the table to Dr. King, said, well, I think we're going to have a good time. And if you can take the ride, he says, it's going to be a nice time. And so I just stayed with him up until now even. But this thing about this film and this audience, I'm not quite sure what to say to you. I'm not quite sure what you need to hear.
Well,
I'm not quite sure what you know.
Well, because you mentioned before your acting, and I agree with you that you're a great actor, maybe one of the greatest American actors. And because the people here at the Walker have had a chance in the last few days to see some of those movies, I did want to ask you specifically about a couple of the pictures you made, particularly Carmen Jones for one of the great Hollywood directors, Otto Preminger, who didn't always have a sterling reputation in terms of how he worked with actors, though he got great performances from actors. But some people said he was a bit of a tyrant on the set. But maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience working with him and working for the second of 3 times in your career with the great Dorothy Dandridge.
Unless you come from the cultural perspective that I or others who have shared that perspective come from, it's hard to understand. Like everyone else, I had movie heroes. I love James Cagney. I love Humphrey Bogart and Edward G. Robinson. I love the West Side Kids in New York City and But I had no movie heroes in the sense that there was someone I could emulate. Because everything I saw on the screen or in theater that was black was always subhuman, was always subdimensional, was always without soul, without purpose, without any honor to the life force. And as a consequence, there was no one for me to emulate. There were individuals like Robeson, individuals like Canada Lee, who had moments in which they could reveal a greatness within their culture, within their race, within their history, but it was never something we could feast on because there was never any of that in any abundance. So when it came time for us to take up the mantle to act and to be in these places, the first question was to what kind of parts are we going to play? It was an act of insanity to think that I was coming out of the Second World War still very pained and angry and in a rage with society on what happened to black servicemen when they came out of the Second World War, the kind of violence that had been heaped upon us, and the Isaac Woodards of the day, and all of the things that happened to so many black GIs that never would go back to the rules as they were and resisted that and paid with their lives for it, sometimes paid for it with their lives without any justice at all. So by the time we had to say, well, do you accept the fact that the Klan has emerged again and brought all this pain and anguish to the table? Do we just lay back and accept it, or do you rebel against it? So we became rebels. And in this rebellion, we had to look for what do we want on the screen. We want the voices of the rebel. We need the voices of challenge. We need voices that said something other than any voices we were seeing. So Sidney and I became, along with another guy by the name of James Edwards, a trio in the very beginning that when we became anointed with the opportunity to go into theater, into the world of acting, it was a brand new experience altogether. Didn't even know where to find certain roots for the emotions we wanted to express. We were never the best and the most proficient at our craft because we never had a chance to exercise our craft. Understood techniques and principles of acting, but to get into the core of it, we had nothing that prepared any of us to go out to become who and what we became. Now, all my fellow actors, Marlon and Tony and the other guys, they got time after time after time, opportunity after opportunity, and I could watch them before my very eyes perfect the deeper part of who they were, and I envied them, not cursed them. I envied them the opportunity to have been able to go back to the craft so regularly. We didn't have such an opportunity. So each moment for us became a great challenge for spirit and social order. And when Otto Preminger stepped in with his very Prussian way of doing things, one said that he wanted to do this film, Carmen Jones. And we will I will be putting a lot at stake in this effort we will all be expressing here, Belafonte. I could never get him to get my name right, Belafonte. And his rage was pure, and he pushed us beyond our capacity to make things work in the way they should. That film took us, for those of you who are very familiar with filmmaking, it took us 18 days to make the film, beginning to end. This includes lip syncing, and not according to click track, because when you do opera, so much of it is legato, some of it is a tempo. You don't have you can't count anything. You got to wait for the breath and the moment, and for whoever's singing your part to get off the goddamn note. So you can catch your breath in time to the lip sync. It was a horrendous journey for us. But we also knew that there was a myth that came along with that film. And it was that if you really wanted to have a disastrous experience economically in film, just make any film that had anything to do with any issue that was black. Guaranteed to be a box office disaster. And they would take film after film to prove their point, those who sought to manipulate such theory. So we felt, at all costs, this had to be the quintessential moment. It was a film that had nothing to do with race, so that was one big relief. We didn't have to go out and tom or do anything except just play the characters that Bizet had written for this story that was laid in Spain and translated so well by Hemingway. By Hammerstein. And when Otto pushed us and got us to where we needed to be, when it was over, we all felt a great sense of accomplishment. We had no idea what the critics would say or what they would do. We just knew that we'd done a work that was very different from anything else that had ever been done by peoples of color or people without color on the screen. And it was the first time that America's sensibilities in relationship to race had been awakened to a new moment. They had never really saw in the great American preoccupation of culture on a big screen a leading man, romantically inclined, kissing a beautiful black woman as the leading lady, romantically inclined, and we're making love and doing things that was an odd thing to see black people doing, let alone inside the community itself, which took great pride in that. So here was this image of Belafonte, an image of Dorothy Dandridge, and the most romantic adorning with this music from Bizet. And when the film came out, it proved Otto Preminger to be eternally correct in the fact that he could strike a blow against the myth that said anything black was doomed to failure, because it not only became one of the most important films of the day, but it also put Dorothy Dandridge on a tragic path, because for her performance in that film, she was nominated for an Oscar. And therefore, the culture had set her up for expectations of what comes along with that kind of anointing, for her to feel that her moment of revelation was now at her disposal, for her to reveal herself, to be seen in multi-dimensional ways. But the system didn't yield. If she did not come back to Sidney Poitier, which she did in her second around with Porgy and Bess, and then back to me for Island in the Sun, she ran out of leading men. Because the system said, there are no other men for you. We can't give you to Clark Gable, we can't give you to Marlon Brando, we're not going to give you to Paul Newman. And if all we're going to do is to keep seeing you with Belafonte and Poitier, we don't get much mileage out of unless we do a series picture. So Dorothy was thrown into a furnace of human existence that was so anguished and so painful to watch her, because it eventually drove her insane. And I think, although I don't think she consciously stepped out to take her life, I think she had to numb the pain. And I think the pills that she took in finding her and attributing it to suicide was the only thing the coroner's office could describe it. But those of us who knew of her anguish knew that it was a terrible time for her. The men didn't do so badly, because the truth of the matter is we could act opposite Marlon. We could act as did Sidney in Defiant Ones with Tony Curtis, and so many other things that we could do. We had some options, but the black woman had no such option. And when she did come back, I think she came back in 2 subsequent films where she played an African queen, and she was a slave, and just always these things that could only see her as a slave woman. I lost track of the question now. I got so carried.
Well, I'm curious.
What about Otto Preminger? Well, yeah, he was a good guy. He was both politically, because he did so much for the black community and getting involved in the civil rights movement, and gave a lot of resources to us. And then, of course, went on to do Porgy and Bess and tried his hand at other things.
But so much of what you say about the issues of that moment 50 years ago in Hollywood are the exact same conversations that were being had just last year around the help and around the question of whether there still are really roles in Hollywood for black actors and actresses playing characters other than maids and servants and historical pictures. I mean, obviously we can think of exceptions, but from your perspective, is Hollywood 50 years after Carmen Jones where you would have liked to have seen it vis-a-vis the employment of black talent?
No, it is not. And I tell you that the reason that I feel strongly on that answer and that point of view is because the people who betrayed what Hollywood could have become are the very people who are the most anointed today by what Hollywood is. And I dare say that I think black artists are perhaps more responsible for the quagmire in which we find ourselves than anything that can be laid off at the doorstep of white folks. White folks got their mischief. They're always going to play it out. You got to just be careful and cautious and know when you get in the moment. We know how to survive that. What we were not prepared for was the inordinate betrayal that the gatekeepers of truth appeared to be when it became their turn to take these gifts of popularity and run with it. Yeah, I'm glad we got great basketball players, we got great football players, and everybody's making $100 million a minute. But then, where do you take life in its more profound existence? What do you make of all this? And outside of having delved into the violence of our culture and playing it so easily as do too many black actors who are in a constant state of rage on all the wrong issues, I do not know that there are many black artists that I rush to greet and rush to exchange an evening with, because I'm too much conscience for them. I've done too much shit that they can't deal with. And if I have to give that up in order to get their anointing, then we have nothing to say to one another. So if you get silent when I walk into the room because I do not participate in the kind of joke you tell, then that's not my burden. That's your problem, not mine. I love to tell jokes and got 1 million you can laugh at. But I do not find any reward in the kind of songs that come out of rap, the kind of rap music that I early on embraced. Because when I did Beat Street and rushed into to get this film made because I saw the power in rap culture and what black actors could do with this. I thought we had the bit in our teeth and that we were going to win the race. I was amazed to see how the jingle turned that right on its head. And we lost content, we lost spirit, we lost social mission, we lost everything that the earliest rappers did for us. Melly Mel, Africa Bambaataa, on and on. It was a crucifying experience to know that that was ours and we sold it back to the Judas traders. So when I see a lot of black artists on the screen rushing for the Oscar and rushing to tremble and to cry and, oh, God becomes overwhelmed, get another Oscar, honey. I fail to see why you tremble. I fail to understand why you see this as an anointing where you have earned the dignity of what you could have earned had you done something to make us all proud of the fact that you had the moment. I think that what the best of us has been seen, the best of us is yet to be known. And I think in between those two extremes, what we become is yet to be revealed, is yet to be unfolded. In the film, I spend most of my time with convicts. I've spent a lot of my time in prison because there's a truth within the disenfranchised who dwell in our prisons that is far greater than any truth you find in the communities in which we reside on a daily basis. The men and women who are incarcerated are dealing with a truth that they can't deny, they can only face it. And we have programs in a lot of these places where men are graduating with degrees in special subjects that they have that we've gotten universities to underwrite. We have a big program in Sing Sing prison done by New York State. We get the men to get degrees in certain social sciences, and they know that they're doing life. But they know that all the new prisoners that walk in, their job is to meet them at the gate and to make sure they never lose themselves in the worst aspects of criminal culture, but find a dialogue and things that they can have at another level by men who have earned a degree and can quote something from Socrates or Plato or take them to places they least expected to go, except back into criminality. So in this environment, I find a certain kind of nobility and a certain kind of truth. And when those men write, you should read their poetry because that's what we should be putting on in our theaters of the world.
I'm looking at Cheryl. Do we have time for take a couple of questions from the audience out here? Yeah.
If you're not worried about the union and overtime, I'm fine.
All right.
All right, so we'll start
Who wants to stay with a question?
over here?
Those of you who have to go, I know that it's getting late, but if we have a question right over
Yeah.
here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Really glad to have you. I have two questions, and you can choose which one. One is kind of, one, I thought I heard you talk before about the fact that you used to spend time at Marcus Garvey's house. I don't know if that is true or not. And then my bigger question is, what do you think is at stake in this next presidential election?
Excellent. Buckle up.
As to the first question on Marcus Garvey, my mother took great pride in the fact that she was born in the very same village he was born in the island of Jamaica, in the parish of St. Anne, and that in the earliest years of her immigrant life in America, Marcus Garvey was at the threshold of the big movement, the Back to Africa movement. And the followers that he had were vast, and the largest black coming together ever in the history of modern history was what happened with the Garvey movement. And she was one of his flock, and she often quoted him to us. By the time I came into being, he was already in England doing time in prison and having set up to be taken out of America by the British was in itself a great moment that should be in our black theater, which unfortunately we don't have, and I don't think we'll have any time soon. But these are some of the great stories that we have to yet tell and reveal in ways that are far more interesting than most people would assume. But Marcus Garvey was an early part of my own teething. First of all, I thought him quite curious. He looked very silly to me, this little short black man, very black, in an admiral's uniform with an admiral's hat. And I used to look at him and wonder what in the world he had to do with Africa. And knowing that all I knew about Africa was what I saw in the movies. When I saw Tarzan of the Apes, and I saw Africans being portrayed by little white midgets that were made up with black makeup to look like pygmies, waiting for the great Adonis to swing through the trees, absent of any language or point of view academically, but led an entire people to a new destiny because of he was the white Adonis. And that was all I knew. And Marcus Garvey, it wasn't until the events of Ethiopia and with what happened with Haile Selassie, and watching Haile Selassie and what came out of the events of the League of Nations and the conflict with the dialogue that was going on with Marcus Garvey, that gave us a richness of debate in that period, which gave rise to the the Pan-Africanist movement, because it was Du Bois and Robeson and all the great African leaders. Kenneth Kaunda were all students at Cambridge and studied and gave this Pan-African movement a luster and an energy that a lot of the writers of the period, Zora Neale Hurston and others, could write about so fluently and so passionately. And all of a sudden, all that just fell off the screen. We have no legacy here. Nobody picks all that up, talking about it. And I think our institutions of learning, black colleges, have no black curriculum that really passionately takes care of its students. It doesn't extract the proper penalty from students who come to want to learn, because it doesn't carry on the legacy of resistance to oppression, because many of the institutions themselves get monies from the oppressor that keeps them open as institutions, and they all of a sudden say, well, we can't say anything against the Rockefeller Fund because we're not going to get any stipends next year when they write their budget. So they have this fallback and transient place from which they make up excuses for what are the things we do and the silly answers we give to our own cause. So that takes care of that. From the point of view of the other part of your question was...
The election. What's at stake in the next election?
What's at stake in the next election is what's always been at stake in every election: America. That's what's at stake. And each time we come upon a period where we believe we're closer and closer to the greater truth of what is the American dream, we wake up only to find that it is far more elusive than we ever thought it could possibly be, and in a way in which we are lost for the instruments and the tools with which to effectively apply how we deal with the dilemma of the moment. The first thing the opposition has done so cleverly is to convince the beneficiaries of the civil rights movement to convince the inheritors of the victories and the harvest of that period that the period is now irrelevant, and that what those people did should be relegated to the dustbins of history, and the thing that was and no longer will be or will ever be again. Once you have made that commitment to that point of view, you have accepted the worst the enemy has to offer you, which is he has just screwed your mind all up and taken you away from a deeper truth. He's really messed with you, and you have submitted to it. And what you've given in place for that is the right to be anointed as the Chief Executive Officer of American Express, or the Chief Executive Officer of Time Warner, or the Chief Executive Officer, if you happen to be black, of anything, they've made you the Chief Executive Officer of. Because all of a sudden, you're now dealing with your new class interest. You're no longer dealing with your racial history, your racial concerns, your community interests from race oppression. You're now a rich dude looking to play what rich people do. Keep my turf at any cost whatsoever. And the cost now is what the Tea Party says you should do. Where I think we feel the greatest absence of a force that could make a difference in how this moment in history is being viewed, is what Barack Obama has failed to do. Not that I don't think that there's still an opportunity for him to do it. I just don't see how he works his way out of the quagmire. Because in the deepest belief of what America is as a nation, that it should overcome such remarkable hurdles to be the nation it is constantly struggling to be, is in itself its own mystery. Because America was conceived in oppression. It was conceived in slaughter. It was conceived in genocide. The Europeans who came here, the founding, the people that landed out there on those rocks, Plymouth and others, didn't take them too long before they made the population they found here extinct. They destroyed an entire culture, an entire people who'd been here centuries before them, thousands of years before. They wiped them out. And when they found no longer a group to exploit that was indigenously accessible, they imported it. They went into the next place for servitude and for exploitation. They brought slavery to America. So almost everything that you see in America, the way in which this nation was built, the things that are the marvel of it as an empire, has all come from slavery, has all come from those who were bonded to slavery to make this thing work. And to have a man who is now the President of the United States of America, who can permit a certain law to endure that says Homeland security is supreme, and the laws we are about to put into execution as a law of the land shall be that we can at any time, government at its own behest, can at any time isolate any citizen it chooses, arrest that citizen, do not charge them with anything, do not even give them the right to a hearing or to even be accused, to have no place in the justice system, to be taken away and spirited to some faraway place and to be tortured because those laws are still on the books, that we have the right to do these things. So if you look at the Homeland Security law and you say that it is still the law of the land, and you see that there are hundreds of citizens in this country who come with an Arab name or an Islamic history, are the victims of this law which is being provoked each day. There are people who have that. How do you square what America is to be if it practices laws that does these things, that we still have Guantanamo Bay, we still have waterboarding, we still have people who can be arrested, who are put on. You have this clash that comes in the need of our greatest moment in our desire for clarity. And Barack Obama doesn't need an act of Congress to make that law challenged. He has the stroke of his executive power. He can write an executive order that challenges that law and then force us to deal with the challenge and develop for him what we did for John Kennedy. John Kennedy didn't come to the office with any great gift of a promise for the future. John Kennedy didn't make history. History made John Kennedy. And when he came, he found a disgruntled mass. He found black people very upset with the plight of race. Young people were very upset with the plight of war. Workers were very upset with outboarding, outsourcing, and all that stuff. And a righteous America rose up with all these conflicts and forced the President of the United States of America to pay heed to what the voices were saying. There is no such engine in the space that Obama gives us. Nothing forces him. There is no constituency holding him accountable. So he's accountable to no one. He very rarely refers to black people. He very rarely visits our community. He very rarely ever comes to Harlem or the black schools on the west side of Chicago. He very rarely goes into our church and gives a sermon to be heard. And never is his presence felt except in these moments when we, the faithful flock around our blindness on the issue of race, decide to let him have the slack to continue to deny us, to deny a voice for our own truth. And if he fails us, then think how he fails the nation. Because if he can't lead us to this place, if not he, then who? And then when you look at the lineup of those whom they're putting to compete with him, the circus is unbelievable. And I think we need a lot of waking up to do here in America and a lot of things to get it on with. And I think we should look in a lot of the places we're not looking. And I hold a lot of black people very much responsible for the fact that we've lost direction. Let me just say this as my closing remark. The last thing Dr. King ever said to me was standing in that room in my house during the conference on what to do with the Poor People's Campaign. He was on his way to Memphis. I was on my way to Washington. I could go down to Memphis and meet up with him, but if I didn't get there in time, he was to join me in Washington to start the Poor People's Campaign. But he was in a foul mood that night, and he could not articulate much except to get on with the business. And when we got on with the business and the meeting was over, and everybody knew what their various responsibilities were, I then asked my handful of us stay behind, "What's really going on, Martin? What's with you?" And he said, "You know, we fought long and hard for integration. We've done a lot to try to turn this country around. And I've come to the conclusion that with all the victories we're experiencing, in the final analysis, we are integrating into a burning house." And when he said that, the inner response was very much like the utterances you just made, shock. If you as our leader think this, I said, well, if that's your vision of this dream of ours, what do you suspect? What do you think we should be doing about it? And he says, we're just going to have to become firemen. And it is with that utterance, with that pronouncement, that I find myself currently looking for where do we take the fire engine? Where do we take the hose? Where do we take all the asbestos and the fire-resisting equipment to get America awakened back to where it was and to what it should be? And we are failing miserably in that mission.
think Harry Belafonte, actor, activist, musician, and fireman, it's been an enormous pleasure to share the stage with you.